Hello everybody. The Constant is a place where all of our colourful characters have somehow found themselves in. But how about we look at where the survivors found themselves before they end up in the Constant? Let's look up what countries they lived in, and if we have the information, a little bit about their heritage. We're going to start with characters where it's confirmed, and work our way down through the implied and ambiguous, exploring some of my own theories, then topping it off with a look at the Constant natives. Let's begin with the most documented character in the entire game, Maxwell. Maxwell is a British man. I am sorry. He's one of the few characters that have a written confirmation of where they once lived, and as we can see from this travel permit, he resided in London before travelling to Liverpool, and from there sailing across the ocean towards America, landing around New York. He then travelled the US via train, yes, that train, until he was brought to his final location of San Francisco, where he would perform as the amazing Maxwell. And we all know how well that turned out. It's not known if he was able to meet his brother, Jack Carter, and his nieces, Wendy and Abigail, who, as we'll go into later, also lived in the US. But seeing how none of them fully recognise each other in-game, it's safe to say they didn't. To the surprise of absolutely nobody, Woody is Canadian. Shocker, I know. This guy is a living, breathing Canadian stereotype, with all his mannerisms, quotes, and his tendency to transform into a selection of Canadian wildlife. If you cut this man, he would bleed syrup. This character is obviously Klei, the developers of DST, putting a bit of their national pride in the game. Did you know that his perk, is thankful for bountiful harvests, actually changes depending on your location? It says, is thankful for bountiful harvest if you live in most places in the world. However, if you live in the United States, it will say, celebrates Thanksgiving too early. But if you live in Canada, his and Klei's home turf, it will read, celebrates Thanksgiving at the correct time. A play on Canadian Thanksgiving. Piggybacking off Woody, we have Walter, who is also Canadian. He's less of a walking stereotype like Woody is. However, we can see in his animated short, he somehow found his way onto the same island Woody lived on before he got snatched into the Constant. And I don't think he would be going too far on his scouting trips far from his home. But if you need more concrete evidence, look no further than his interactions with Woody. They both refer to each other as from the same neck of the woods, and flat out confirms that Walter is also Canadian. Wes is French. I mean, even you could have told me that. His depiction is the generic French mime, and in his animated short we can see him performing on the streets of France. His quotes have nothing to go off, obviously, but we can see via the hidden quotes in the code whenever Wes performs on the stage, that we can see him communicating to us in French. How sweet. That's all we have to work with, and honestly, it's all we need. Those are, as far as I know, the only characters that are flat out confirmed in their nationality and heritage. From here on out, we're moving into strongly implied territory. Let me know if you agree or disagree with my placements, or if there's any details that I missed. We have our second French-speaking character, Wiley. A lot of people pen this guy as being from France, however, we can see in his lore that he only worked in France most of his life as a sous chef, and had to move back home with his mother Angeline because of her deteriorating dementia. As we can see in his short, his mother's home looks to be in a rather tropical setting, and that combined with his steel drum voice, an instrument invented in Trinidad and Tobago, it's a rather safe assessment to make that Wiley possibly lived in the Caribbean, possibly on a French-speaking territory. We have no way to pen down exactly where he lived, but I feel like it would be the best fit for him to put him in that general area. Late in the list we have Wilson. This gentleman scientist has never mentioned anything about his background or heritage, but we do know for a fact that before he got snatched, he lived in the United States. Most likely Ohio, due to him living in Wagstaff's old house. However, we go outside of the game. Many years ago, Klei did mention that Wilson was a European immigrant who moved to the United States. With a name like Wilson Percival Higsbury, I think you'd understand if I feel he moved somewhere from the UK. That, tied with his perfect English and gentlemanly outwardness, would make some sense. Of course, he could be from any European country for all we know. Wendy was most probably born in the United States, as that's where we have confirmation she's living before she got taken, thanks to Jack Carter's letter to his brother, Maxwell, when he arrived in the United States. But that does mean she is at the very least half English, as we don't know her mother's heritage at all. It's also very possible her family emigrated to the US whilst she was even younger. but with how fancy their house is and how Jack mentions that Maxwell finally made it to the US, shows me that Jack and his family have been in the United States for a long time. Willow, I believe, is also an American. She makes no real remarks to her heritage or even her parents at all, so we know very little in that regard. My main theory is that because she was behind the chain of fires across places in the US, such as Wickerbottom's library and possibly the Voxola factory, I find it hard for a girl who spent her entire life in care, and most likely parts of her adulthood homeless, to be able to somehow cross country borders and end up in the United States. So it would make sense for her to be born and raised there. Again, could be wrong though. Let me know if I miss any deep Willow lore buried in her quotes. Speaking of Wickerbottom and her library, I too think she is an American. She's in the same boat a lot of characters are about to be in on this list, where they have no references in any of their quotes to their nationality, so all we have to go off of is what's shown to us through animated shorts. And what's shown to us is that her library is, or well, was, located in the United States, specifically New York. Due to her age, it's possible she may have emigrated from a different country, and her parents doubly so, but sadly we have nothing to go off other than her library's location. Let's look at Weber. Now, Weber is a bit of an interesting one, not for the usual reasons of being a humanoid spider, but because he has quotes referring to his granddad owning a tam o'shanter, which we can also see in his animated short, which has led people, including myself, to believe he has some form of Scottish heritage, alongside his tendency to refer to his mother as a mum, which is more of a UK thing, though it could also be down to the time period. However, in his animated short we can see that his dad was doing some dubious dealings with a certain Robert Wagstaff, who himself operated out of the United States. Sure, it's possible he travelled outside of the United States for this, but I find it incredibly hard to see how Wagstaff managed to somehow smuggle a giant cross-dimensional spider through customs. So for that sake, I'm going to say Weber, at least part of his family, are originally from Scotland, now living in the United States. Moving on to the other Reign of Giants character now, we have Wigfrid, and just like Weber, another tricky one. You see, she assumes the role of a Valkyrie, which is a character from a Germanic musical drama, with also some of her quotes and such referring to Norse mythology. You would think she would be from somewhere around Europe then, right? Well, I personally feel she is an American woman. An actress living in the United States who just played the role of a Valkyrie in her performances in her youth, who gets a bit too into it when forced to survive. My evidence for this is that in her animated short, we can see the headlines and newspapers itself in perfect English, though this could be just for viewing purposes, as well as them covering news about the earthquake in San Francisco. Sure, it could be international coverage, but I still think strongly about her being an American, or at the very least living there. Heck, in her animated short we can even see that she's a naturally brunette and not a redhead, but this could also be a result of the colour grading. Let me know what you think about this take. And that's where my vote of confidence characters end. From here on out we're diving into deep speculative waters, so apologies if my theories make little sense. Let's start with WX78. And we honestly know nothing about WX78's past life before they became who they are now, and honestly we don't need to know since that's not who they are. I think it's a safe assumption to make that since they were working with Wagstaff, who for a long period operated in the US, specifically Ohio, was probably themselves built in the US too. Wagstaff himself most likely moved from England, but I feel like he did that at a much younger age, before he started doing his evil science nonsense. Winona I have my own little crackpot theory about. So we know for a fact she lives and most likely worked in the United States thanks to her job at the Voxola factory, but I have a crazy little headcanon that she, as well as her sister Charlie, are actually Canadian. My sole reasoning for this theory is that in the William Carter puzzles, Charlie writes to Maxwell, offering him a stay up at her family's cabin in British Columbia, which is a province in Canada. Now I know it could be a simple case of they own a cabin across the border, but I like to think she and Charlie have some Canadian connections, even if Woody and Walter never acknowledge it. Wanda, I have no idea where to place her. She's one of those characters who speaks almost entirely in gimmick, and like many of the characters we looked at before, have nothing to say about where they came from. There are theories that she might possibly have some connections to France too, since in her animated short she ends up there during her little chase from the shadows, and we all know how Wanda's watches only let her travel to places she's been to in the past. But there is one outlier we should talk about. She refers to her father as Baba in her quotes for Taffy. Baba is an honorific term used in numerous cultures and languages for numerous roles, most notably Persian, used in several Asian and African cultures to refer to somebody's father. However, this is also found in several other languages too. It's honestly a big confusing mess I'm gonna need your guys' help on. Where would you put her? I'll play it safe and say somewhere around here. Keep in mind this could also be just her heritage. She could be living anywhere else in the world. Only Klei knows the full story. And now the one we've been looking forward to the most, Wolfgang. Oh boy, Wolfgang. So we have this strong man with a Germanic name who makes references to being a communist, who also says frog legs are a delicacy in his home country, who also lives in America. So where do we even start with this? The frog legs quote obviously refers to France, since that's a popular stereotype over there. His name is, again, obviously a very famous German name. And his inspect quote for the hammer wanting a sickle draws obvious parallels to being from the USSR, or equivalent depending on when DST actually takes place. Honestly, this feels just like Klei wanted to make a generic European character with every trope under the hood. He's both French, German, Russian, and now American at the same time. Maybe he just travelled around a bunch. Maybe he was born to German parents in France and was an avid communist. I'm just going to do the safe answer and say that he probably comes from this general area. Please let me know how you feel about this. Originally I was going to place him in like East German, but since we don't know the exact year DST takes place over, we have no idea what countries were even around at that time, and my early 19th century geopolitics aren't the best. Whew. With that, we've covered all of the survivors not native to the constant. But how about we do a quick lightning round with those that are? Wormwood came from the moon, or their government name of Alta. Specifically, the gemstone that makes up Wormwood's core fell from Alta and landed among some ruins in the floating islands that make up the expansion of Hamlet. It's not known how Wormwood ended up in the forest with the rest of the survivors. Perhaps Charlie or even Alta brought them there since they're important for some reason or another. Ooh. Wart hails from the Constance Marshes. It's not known fully if Wart herself was actually originally a goat person from the quagmire the Gorge event takes place in, but either way, they found themselves in the marshes we all know and love. At some point they made contact with the survivors, and the rest is history. And last, but very much not least, Wartox. We know annoyingly little about where Wartox is from or even what he is, but it's probably a safe assumption that it was somewhere in the constant, perhaps somewhere unseen as of now. Maybe he's just what all Krampuses and Klauses were when they were younger. Maybe they're from the Gorge or even the Forge. Maybe they're not from this world to begin with. I wish we knew, but I have a feeling we might never know, just like Wartox would want. And that about covers that. Let me know if you agree or disagree with any of the placements I made, or if I missed some crucial information that would flip the script. No matter where the survivors came from matters anymore, since the constant is their home now. For better and for mostly worse. Thank you all so much for watching and supporting in this new series. It means the world to me. Take care everybody, and bye bye.